many are still grieving. Some families will be lost to one another forever. To those of you who face the difficulties of reconnecting with family and establishing ongoing relationships, we say sorry. We offer this apology in the hope that it will assist your healing and in order to shine a light on a dark period of our nation's history. To those who have fought for the truth to be heard, we hear you now.
You're listening to Adopt Perspective podcast, a podcast for anyone affected by adoption. I'm your host and president of Jigsaw Queensland, Jo Sparrow. This podcast is a production of Jigsaw Queensland Post-Adoption Support Service. However, the views expressed are those of the people participating and not necessarily Jigsaw Queensland. The podcast discusses adult themes and listener discretion is advised. Welcome back to Adopt Perspective. I'm your host, Jo Sparrow, the president of Jigsaw Queensland. Today I'm joined once again by a deeply respected voice in Australian family law and our adoption community, Professor Nahum Mushin AM, a former family court judge and chair of the Forced Adoption Apology Reference Group. In our previous conversation on the 19th of August 2020, we explored the history and legacy of forced adoption in Australia. But today, as Queensland prepares to review its adoption legislation, Adoption Act 2009, and tie it to the Commission of Inquiry into the Child Safety System, we're revisiting this conversation with new urgency. In a press conference prior to his election, Queensland Premier David Crisafulli signalled his intent to bring back adoption as a response to youth crime. But is adoption really the best solution when a child cannot safely remain with their family? Or does it continue to repeat the mistakes of the past under a different name? Nahum, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
It's so wonderful to see you again.
Oh, it's always a pleasure.
So let's start with what's happening here in Queensland. You've seen many adoption reforms over the decades. What are your thoughts when you hear adoption positioned as a solution to youth crime?
Look, I think adoption has passed its use-by date. I think that's the bottom line. I've been arguing for years that we should be taking a completely different course. And by the way, Jo, I think we need to also make it quite clear that in all our considerations here, that really what we're talking about is the best interests of the children are paramount, are the most important thing, and everything has to depend on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. It absolutely has to be central to any decisions that are made.
Yes.
Now, bear with me here, Nahum. I've done a little bit of calculation, and math is not my thing, but I put a lot of work into this. So since 1940, it's estimated that up to 250,000 adoptions have taken place in Australia. But the impact of adoption, of course, doesn't stop just with the adopted person. Every adoption typically involves 2 biological parents, 2 adoptive parents, 4 biological and 4 adoptive grandparents, siblings from both families, children and partners of the adopted person. So when you add it up, it's conservative to say that each adoption directly impacts at least 10 to 12 people across biological, adoptive and subsequent generations. So that means 2.5 to 3 million Australians have been directly impacted by adoption. Now, in a country of 26.7 million people, that's approximately 1 in every 9 to 10 Australians. And that's a conservative estimate. If you include extended family, partners, and professionals, the number's even higher. So adoption is not a niche issue. It's a national one, woven into the fabric of millions of Australian families, and it has an almost fairy tale strength narrative for the majority of Australians, a happy ending for a saved child. In our last interview and in your 2024 paper for the Griffith Journal of Law and Human Dignity, you describe adoption as a word and a concept as a trigger and a traumatic word for many people. And as the figures I mentioned just confirm, that's not a small number of Australians. So can you unpack what you mean by that and why Australia's history of adoption matters in today's policy conversations?
Yeah, first of all, my admiration for your maths and for the for the research that you've done. I've often described the consequences of adoption, and particularly in the forced adoption space where I've worked most, um, as being more than throwing a pebble into a pond. It's like throwing a very big boulder into a very large lake,
Yeah.
because the consequences of adoption, as you quite rightly say, are very widespread indeed. And we need to be very cognizant of that, because in whatever we do in the law reform space, we've got to take into account that this is not just a fly-by-night exercise. This is an exercise which affects, as you quite rightly say, vast numbers of people, and most importantly, vast numbers of children. And that's the, I think, the starting point of it all. Um, the whole concept of triggers, we all have them. Uh, there might be good triggers and bad triggers. We might, for example, go to a particular restaurant and remember a specific event, a pleasant event. But it's the negative triggers that we're talking about here, of course. Um, it's very it applies to pretty well all of us, that what you're doing on a day by day basis is living experiences, and at times the experiences which you live today bring back experiences that you've had in the past.
Mhm.
And it's that is a trigger. So that um, if you are a person who has experienced forced adoption, then just the mention of the word adoption can bring back those appalling experiences. And I don't think that that's understood. And one group for whom it's not understood at all, in my view, is the children who experience adoption at maybe 3 months of age, or 6 weeks of age, or at 16 years of age. And the consequences to them of having later experiences can be profoundly negative.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know when all of this started coming up in the media, we've been so waiting for this adoption legislative review because there are so many important things that we still need to be done in there. And we've been gearing up for years waiting for it because it's just so overdue. And then I heard that press conference where it was bring back adoption. I'm like, oh, they're not listening. They don't listen to what we're saying, the impacts on us. And it had a really profound impact on me. Of just not being heard, people not understanding, people still making adoption sound like this fairy tale narrative, and that it doesn't come with its own sets of consequences and issues, which is so frustrating. And I know that many other people probably felt the same.
Our decision makers, I think, see adoption as an easy answer. We've
Yeah,
got a problem. A child cannot, for whatever reason, and we need to acknowledge that
yeah,
there are children who cannot live with their parents for all sorts of reasons. It might be death, psychiatric problems, drugs, alcohol, violence, or there are all sorts of reasons. But okay, really, what we do, we take them out of this unsatisfactory family and we put them into a new family, and we don't think about the consequences of that for everybody, as you quite rightly say by your maths, and in particular, the consequences on the children. And this is not an easy issue. This is a very complicated issue, and and there are too many decision makers who think that we can solve it in an easy way. And so often, an easy solution makes for more problems. And I think in the adoption space, that's what's happening.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, you said in our last interview that making decisions about permanency is, in your view, fallacious. And what we really need to be thinking about is long term. And this really spoke to me because we make these permanent decisions for children. but we're only children for 18 years and then we're adults and we spend the rest, the majority of our lives living with the repercussions of these well-intentioned decisions. And I believe we must make decisions with this fact in mind. And I recently spoke with Paul Sunderland, who is a well-respected
Yes.
adoption
Mm.
and addiction expert from the UK. And he said that adoption implies ownership. So what are your thoughts on all of that, especially from your years on the family court bench?
Well, it's not just a child moving from childhood to adulthood. The decision that you make for a 3-year-old may well not be right for that child at 8 and 13 and 16. And in the circumstances in which effects on children can be so profound, saying permanent is defying facts and logic. And again, I don't think that that is understood by those people who are making these decisions. So the child of 3, you asked me in the family law context, so you've got a relationship breakdown, the child is 3 years of age, you have to make the decision on the best interest of the child. And for example, there might be violence on one side of that family. It might not be appropriate for the child to see the violent parent, but it might be appropriate in some years' time where perhaps you can have the right degree of supervision. There are all sorts of permutations, and that leads to another thing, Joe, that I think is too often ignored. And that is that every case must be decided on its own facts.
Mhm.
You can't generalize about these things. You can't say, "Oh, that child has has committed various crimes. Adoption." That might be wrong for that child. There might be family. There might be kinship. There might be all sorts of answers, and you've got to decide it for each child on the particular facts, and you need to keep an open mind. You need to hear all the facts, weigh it up, and decide what's the best outcome for the child because the child's interests are paramount.
Yeah, yeah. I often hear politicians and people who are charged with the protection of our most vulnerable children say that we need to provide children with stability and permanency. And I think we all agree, as you said, that the best outcome for the child relies on stability and with a lens to a long term solution. But let's talk options. If a child cannot safely live with their parents or kin, what are the alternative long-term pathways that are available in Queensland that don't involve the severance of legal identity and family ties that occur during adoption?
Well, there are various, I mean, there's foster care, there's guardianship orders, there are orders that can be made under various pieces of legislation, but I can't resist answering this sort of question with my basic proposition that one of the difficulties that we've got is that the law with regard to these things is so fractured that deciding it in each particular case is in itself difficult.
Mm.
As I think I said right at the very beginning, I think that adoption is a concept which is past its use by date. Um, Again, I think the concept of as we say here, child born in Albury or Wodonga, I think for you it would be what Coolangatta and Tweed Heads, would it be?
Sounds
Um,
about
would be adopted pursuant to 2 different laws
right.
because there are 8 different laws, 6 states, 2 territories, 8 different laws, and juxtaposing posing that against the family law concept, where the whole thing is Commonwealth, with the exception of West Australia, which has its state courts, but basically applies exactly the same law, and the appellate process for the WA court is the family law appellate process. I think what you need is one national law. I don't think you need the concept of adoption at all. I think really what you need to do is treat what is now adoption as what is in the best interest of a child in the same context as you do it in family law.
Mhm.
And I think that's the point at which you then have the opportunity to bring in all of the concepts which are relevant to every child and which enable you to decide each case on its merits, with the paramountcy of the best interest of the child being the factor.
Yeah, it's interesting. I read that in your paper where you were talking about federalizing
Yes.
jurisdiction. I'm probably using all the wrong legal terms, but of adoption or of these issues. It was really interesting, and you made a very compelling case. The one thing is like an organization that supports and advocates for people who are impacted by adoption, like Jigsaw, we've been doing that for 50 years, is that it would centralize the decision making, say, let's say in Canberra, right, which has close proximity to Sydney, where in New South Wales they've got progressively moving towards more adoptions. So they've kind of got the ear of maybe the Hollywood sector. I don't know. Whoever's making the decisions and has the money and has the access to power down there has been pushing towards opening adoptions back up. So it would mean that stakeholders, people who are impacted in other states and territories in Australia, have less access for the very fact that we don't live down in that area. We don't have the money to go traveling and see every single politician. So in respect to that, that would be the only downside that I can see, that the fact that it's in states' control democratizes in our access to the politicians and their access of power. Whereas if it is centralized federally, then that takes away some of our power to speak to the people that we need to, I guess.
I understand what you're saying. I disagree with you, and I think the answer to that is that we have a really very good law reform system in Australia, which is headed by the Australian Law Reform Commission. By the way, they've just received a surrogacy reference.
Mhm.
So they're looking at the whole of surrogacy law,
Yeah.
and the input with regard to that is being done on a state by state basis through the Law Reform Commission. And the fact that it's centred in Canberra, um, in my view, doesn't make a difference for the way in which it occurs. But I understand what you're saying. My difficulty is, as I point out in that paper, all the acts, for example, for adoption, while they're similar, are different, and each of them is administered by the court of the state instead of a central court like the family court. And that, in my view, is the crunch.
Yeah. And we do have actually Jigsaw's just put through a submission for that surrogacy review as well. And we'll be keeping a close eye on that too. What are the benefits of the approaches we talked about before? So guardianships and parenting orders, that kind of stuff, compared to adoption, especially for the child's identity, rights, and connection to family and culture.
Well, in a sense, putting a label on it isn't as important as what it involves on the ground. So that word identity you just used is, in my view, fundamental. And we saw this from the forced adoption consultations that we did, that there is an overwhelming need by adoptees to know their identity. So that, for example, when I was on the court, I had several applications on behalf of children who wanted to go and see their fathers in jail. In a couple of cases, their fathers were there for murder, but they still wanted to know who they were. And that's really basic to our whole being, to the core of of each of our existence. And and unless we honour that proposition, we are not, in my view, we cannot make the best interest of the child paramount,
Yeah.
because there's an absolute entitlement in every individual in the society to know their roots. And and until and unless that happens, so that whether you're talking about guardianship or fostering or whatever, um, it's got to involve that as a basic concept.
Yeah. I mean, my own experience, I've discovered some very sad, traumatic things from my biological history that were not fun to learn about and not fun to process. But I've come to understand that they were integral in the shaping of my own identity, that I had to understand these things, and it made sense of some parts of me that I hadn't understood before. We can't run from the sad parts of our history. We need to try and understand them and get support in doing that.
Yes, yes, and that's right. And you would have come out of that um, a better person for that understanding. And it's also, I hope I'm um, not going too far with this, but there would be circumstances in which you would have a trigger which
Yeah.
might remind you of something like that, and it can happen. I mean, I've recently had a very difficult time, and and I've found myself seeing something completely harmless on television, and all of a sudden it brings back these memories. That's the whole concept of triggers. Now, that's part of a human condition, and understanding and coping with them, dealing with them, and all of those sort of things is part of maturation and part of enabling us to live with the people around us.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry to hear you've had a hard
Yeah,
time
no,
processing.
no. These are things that are happening. I just entered my ninth decade a few weeks ago, so there's plenty of reason to have these sort of things which leap out at you from just in the most unexpected ways.
Yeah. Happy
Mm.
birthday for a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
as someone with lived experience of adoption, I find it deeply confusing to read, for example, on Premier Crisafulli's website, that the LNP supports the Aboriginal child placement principle, and he recognises the importance of protecting a child's name, identity, language, and cultural ties, but only in relation to Aboriginal children. Why do you think this understanding of identity, culture, and community isn't extended to all children who face separation from families?
I wish I knew, Joe, because that's the precise illustration of the need for identity. If the same were to apply across the board, there would be we may not be solving the problem because there's still other areas, but we certainly would be going a long way towards solving it. It's that understanding of where we all fit into the where we stand ourselves and in regard to those who have left us and those who are dear to us now.
So, one of the painful legacies of Australia's forced adoption era is that we now have, unintentionally, a deeply compelling case study in the long-term effects of adoption. And many of those adopted as infants didn't learn the truth about their removal until adulthood. And by then, any trauma they carried couldn't be attributed to their being removed by forced adoption because they hadn't known. It was adoption itself that shaped their sense of identity, belonging, and loss. Given this, I think their voices are an essential resource in the shaping of future policy. Now, and you've seen long been an advocate for centering lived experience. Why do you think there is still such a resistance at a policy level to listening to those directly impacted by past adoptions?
Oh, look, I don't know. Uh, I think, well, I have to say that in the forced adoption space, I'm bitterly disappointed that government didn't go on with several things that we were recommending in the implementation group. I mean, there should be a forced adoption national day, for example. That it seemed to me that was a no-brainer. And then there was the whole thing of reparations and birth certificates, and it's gradually sort of happening. But um, I think I think that decision makers find this area threatening. I think that they don't understand the fundamental importance of human relationships and family ties and identity. Um, and really, it's far more important to get that right than it is to get submarines or something like that. I mean, I think this whole area of relationships within the society really is what makes a society a good place. And I think that too many, I'm not saying every one of them by any means, because particularly in the forced adoption work that I did, I dealt with some outstandingly committed politicians in that. Starting with the then Prime Minister Julia Gillard and going through others, but they find it threatening. They just can't deal with it because too much of it is too close to home.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
And I think sometimes, just like I said earlier, that fairy tale narrative of the saved child and, you know, being an answer to infertility, those kinds of issues are so strong, and such a strong narrative because prospective adoptive parents have a voice, right? Where adopted
Yes,
people, adopted
yes,
children don't have a voice. Um, so that is the strong narrative that sits in the background of everyone. And that's why I really urge them to listen to people's lived experience of adoption, because it's so much more complex than they think. And to just say adoption is the answer, it's just such simplistic thinking. And they need to go a lot deeper.
yes, yes, indeed. Mm.
So, Jigsaw, we've supported thousands, tens of thousands of
You have
Australians.
indeed, and profoundly, if I may say so, to the highest possible standard. I have great admiration for Jigsaw.
Oh, thank you, Naeem.
Mm.
That means a lot.
Mm.
So we've supported so many people, and while there's still far too little formal research into the long-term outcomes for adopted people, we hear their stories firsthand every single day. Some describe their adoptions as good enough. Many speak of deep challenges, including abuse, domestic violence, family breakdowns, or a lingering sense that they never truly belonged.
Yes,
Sometimes adoptive families struggle to adjust or to process the grief of infertility.
yes,
What's particularly concerning is that once an adoption is finalised, to my knowledge, there's no ongoing oversight long term. So, from a policy point of view, I can see why this might appeal, because it takes the child essentially off the books of child safety. But doesn't it also expose children to new and unmonitored risks?
absolutely. And if you start with a traumatic situation, which has to be the definition for in order for adoption to be even thought about, then you can't just say, "Oh yes, close that box, put the lid back on, put it in the filing cabinet, and that's it." You can't do that. You've got to maintain it, because what you were saying just then reminded me of these late knowledge adoptions.
Late
I had-
discovery.
Yes, I talked to somebody just recently who found out at the age of 56 that they were adopted. I mean, I think that's absolutely egregious, and completely unacceptable. And for that particular person, it's produced the most awful consequences.
Yeah. Absolutely. And we certainly have plenty of late discovery adoptees contacting us now, or people who've waited right up until their adoptive parents have passed away to start exploring their roots and how they feel about their adoption. And that's deeply sad to me that it's taken all of this time or
Yes.
anything like that to make them feel that they can. So for the
Mm.
Queensland government under Premier Crisafulli and Child Safety Minister Amanda Cam remain committed to expanding the use of adoption, despite growing concerns and lived experience that challenge its effectiveness. There is at least one important legal alternative that they could consider, and that is simple adoption. For those unfamiliar, could you please explain the difference between simple and plenary adoption, which is the case in Queensland currently, and why this distinction matters when it comes to preserving aspects of a child's identity and connections?
Joe, I actually went to the Oxford Dictionary with regard to plenary, and I've got it in front of me at the moment. Complete, entire, perfect, not deficient in any element or respect, absolute, unqualified.
Yeah,
Essentially, plenary adoption as not is a term that's not really been used much in Australia. I think it originates from France, but it's the concept where upon adoption, the adoptee's original family is ruled completely out, has no rights or interest at all. And we know that more as close adoption.
mm,
And uh, that's that's the starting point
yeah,
for saying how unsatisfactory adoption is and how
yeah,
contrary to the best interests of the child. And again, the word identity keeps on coming back, but it's all about that sort of area. On the other hand, simple adoption, which we more usually know here in Australia as open adoption, has relaxed that so that in appropriate circumstances, where it's in the best interest of the child might have the opportunity to have an ongoing relationship with the child's parents and or one of them, or siblings, or grandparents, or whatever, so that you that's a more broad-minded way of doing it, and in fact, I take that as being a stage away from closed adoption or plenary adoption, as some people know it, to my proposition that it should be a Commonwealth matter in the family court, and you do away with the word adoption altogether.
mm. Yeah, and my understanding too is that so an open adoption, in my understanding, can still be a plenary adoption because plenary adoption completely severs the legal relationship between the child and the birth family.
Yes,
Child becomes the legal child of the adoptive parents only. The original birth certificate is replaced with a new one listing the adoptive parents. And in most cases, it's irreversible, very difficult to reverse if the
yes,
adopted child wanted to. And as you said, it reflects the closed adoption model that we've had in Australia. And simple adoption, which, as you said, is used in some other countries, maintains the legal ties with the birth family and does not erase the child's original identity.
yeah,
Adoptive parents gain parental responsibility, but it could be shared or layered, which is again
yes,
individual
yes,
cases. Yeah. And the original birth certificate is retained, which is such a thing for adopted people. Like, we do not like generally that we're given a whole new identity, a whole new birth certificate, and that our original one is not ours anymore. It's not legal. It's got something stamped on there that's saying it's not the real birth certificate.
yes, yeah.
It can be, simple adoption can be revoked or altered under certain conditions. So I guess it's seen as a more flexible identity preserving option. So if they
Well,
cannot,
by definition, it is, but it's still, in
yeah,
my view, completely unsatisfactory for the reasons that we've talked about. And uh, I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
I just don't see how you can change it to accommodate the best interests of the child, other than by moving away from adoption altogether. So
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, I was just listening to what you were just saying. I didn't count, but you used the word identity in that at least several times, and that's what we're all talking about. And you, as an adoptee, would see that as does every adoptee, see that as being fundamental.
It's been the challenge of my life, and I would imagine many
Of
adults
course it is.
would say I'm only just starting to get a handle on who I am, and I'm 53 years old. Yeah.
Do I? They'd say in America, I rest my case.
So, all right, let's wrap this up with this. If the Queensland government genuinely wants to improve outcomes for vulnerable children, what would you encourage them to consider as they step into the inquiry in the legislative review of the Adoption Act? What
Okay,
message have you got for Queensland decision makers?
talk to every other state and territory, get together, say to the Commonwealth of Australia, we want to refer our powers in adoption to you, and you can treat them as family law, and that's that's what I would do. I think that's the ultimate answer. By the way, look, there are a couple of little issues, one in particular, which comes up as a result of that proposition, and that's in particular the law of succession, so that upon the death of the parents or the adoptee, where does succession of property lie? And you need to make consequential legislation coping with that, and that needs to be on a state by state basis, because that becomes far too complicated otherwise. But it's easily done. What this needs is, first of all, understanding, two, political will, and three, intelligent people who know how to draft proper legislation to give effect to ultimately what's in the best interest of children.
Yeah, absolutely. As a president of Jigsaw Queensland, I could be flapping my mouth an awful lot, but you know what I use more than that? I use my ears and I use an open mind. And so every decision I make with regards to this organisation, I'm listening to people with lived experience and what they're telling us, and I'm keeping an open mind about things, and that would be my message to the people making
Well,
these
that's just
decisions.
that's why Jigsaw Queensland are so successful and are accommodating the needs of your clients.
Thanks, Nam. So thank you so much for your wisdom and continued advocacy. You are such a great friend to our community. Your voice is one of integrity, deep compassion, and unwavering justice. And we're grateful to have you as part of this vital conversation.
Thank you, and it's a delight to talk to you as always.
To our listeners, I want to acknowledge that the coming months are going to be challenging as you read and watch media stories debating and promoting Bring Back Adoption as an answer to youth crime. I remind you that Jigsaw Queensland offers peer support groups every month for mothers, a mixed group for parents who lost children to adoption, and adopted people with our adoptee-only support group. These are safe spaces to share and to be heard and to find community. And you can find information about our schedule on our website or our Facebook page. Facebook page is the best place to find out what's going on. So Jigsaw Queensland, we're here to support you. If you'd like to support the podcast, please leave a review, share episodes, or get in touch. And we'd love to hear from you. Maybe share this episode with your local member. And if you have a story that you'd like to share, we invite you to apply to be a guest on the podcast. Simply visit the main podcast page on the Jigsaw Queensland website and complete the prospective guest form that you'll find there. And just remember, the Adopt Perspective can be and is listened to by people all over the world. So thank you for listening, and bye for now. Thanks for listening to the Adopt Perspective podcast. If you'd like to find out more, go to the podcast page on www.jigsawqueensland.com. and you'll find a wealth of information and resources on the website. If you reside in Queensland, you can reach Jigsaw Queensland's Forced Adoption Support Service on toll-free 1800 210313, or you can call Jigsaw on 07 33 58 6666. If you live in another state of Australia, you can still call the Forced Adoption Support Service number, and your call will be answered by the Forced Adoption Support Service in the state that you're calling from. In every other state, Relationships Australia operates this service.
A big thank you to Matt Sparrow for composing and recording our original theme music. Until next time, I'm Jo Sparrow saying farewell from Adopt Perspective, a podcast for anyone affected by adoption.